So yeah, welcome to the very first episode of Origin Stories, and my very first guest is Tony Quinn, Scottish, Kiwi, Australian entrepreneur of some repute, I would say. Tony, where are you zooming from, Tony? First of all, where in the world are you?
So I'm at home, and home is Gold Coast, Australia. We've been like everybody else. We've been in isolation, if you like, for some time since March. We've been able to go to New South Wales. I have a factory in New South Wales, but that's about the extent of it. I've been up to the Barrier Reef a couple of times. Um, I really, really miss being able to go to New Zealand. I wouldn't care if the rest of the world was out of bounds for the rest of my life. I don't care. I've seen it all, been there. But I really do sincerely miss New Zealand greatly.
Very good. Before we go any further, I should introduce you. Do you remember the TV show This Is Your Life? Here's a short version of yours, Tony. You were born in Aberdeen in 1957, and you started working for your father in his pet food business from a very young age. You bought your first business, a signwriting company, at the age of 21, and doubled your money when you sold it a few years later to move to Australia. After a few false starts in Australia, you got back into the pet food industry in New Zealand, and you haven't really looked back since. You sold VIP Pet Food, your pet food brand, for 410 million. And since then, you've bought and sold a number of other businesses in the FMCG, or fast moving consumer goods sector, in Australia, the US, and the UK. You're also a fast mover in a race car, and you've won rallies and circuit races all over the world. And as part of your passion for motorsport, you own two racetracks in New Zealand: Highlands Motorsport Park in Cromwell and Hampton Downs in the Waikato. I'm a little biased, obviously, because I helped you tell your story in your book a few years ago, 0 to 60. But you've got an incredible origin story, and origin stories are all about how our past shapes our present, and how a few key turning points and decisions have a massive impact on our lives, right? That's live.
Sorry,
That's
that's just
that's
modern technology.
That's live TV for you, Tony. Yeah, when I asked you about doing this podcast, you told me you had too many turning points to cover off in 45 minutes. But I want to start maybe by asking you to list some of the major ones, and we've covered some of them in that introduction. But some of the major ones, some of the key turning points over the course of your career.
Well, it's true that there's so many,
Mm,
and I don't know how to grade them or
mm,
rank them. But my first memory of something strange was I was fortunate enough to pass an exam for one of the best schools, well, the best school in the region in Scotland. Um, I shouldn't have even gone to the exam because my parents couldn't afford the fees.
mm.
It was it's almost like a private college. Anyway, I passed the exam, and so I was surrounded by doctors and lawyers' sons. It was an all boys school.
Yeah.
And so, anyway, I didn't feel out of place because I was a kid and I was
Mm,
naive to all that stuff.
yeah.
Um, but there was a chess championship, which I'd never even heard. I didn't even know how to play chess. I had no idea. But it was a compulsory thing that we had to do.
Mm,
Anyway, long story short, was very quickly I learned quickly how to play the game, and I actually won the championship, much to the surprise of my family. Um, and at that point, I kind of got the impression that I was a quick learner
mm,
and a strategic sort of decision maker, and I loved to win. It was good to win. So that was a bit of a point in my life where I thought, oh, yeah, okay, I can compete with anybody and possibly win. I did have a bout of shoplifting shortly after that and was caught by the police, luckily. And I then discovered how it felt to be um, taken into a police car and taken to the police station and having to explain my actions. But anyway, that was another story. So life is full of um, little journeys that you go on. Um, Also, when I left school, I wasn't really going to leave school. I was going to go on to be an architect. And during the school holidays and weekends, I always worked in my dad's factory for, it would have to say, for, I don't know what's less than peanuts, but whatever is less than peanuts, I worked for nothing, basically. And my dad took very ill with brucellosis during the break between finishing school exams and going to university. My dad took very ill and called me up to his bedroom and said, I'd like you to work in the factory. And it was like, yeah, okay. There was no news there. And he said that he would pay me
Mm.
£20 a week, which was a good wage at that time. And so I left school then, forgot about going to university, um, and started working for 20 quid a week. Worked for my dad for 2 years. Um, Shortly, when I got my license so that I could work 7 days a week,
Yeah.
I got a rise to 25 quid a week. Anyway, I continued to argue with him, and as sons do, argued with dad. He didn't know what he was doing, blah, blah, blah. I knew better. And then he said, look, you know how to run a business better than me, in a sarcastic way.
Right.
Um, why don't you go off and run your own business, and you can take all the guts and blood and bones and make bone meal over there. Go over there and show me how to make money. And dad knew that he wasn't making any money out of that. That was a real problem
Yeah.
for him. And the first week that I went into business, I was earning 25 quid a week working for dad, left him, immediately started in business, and made £132 profit that week. And I thought, Jesus, that's so that was another moment in life
Yeah.
where you went, wow, that's a better thing to do.
Yeah.
And then, of course,
I think that was when your dad said that started saying that you had the Midas touch,
well,
which is a,
that all helped him with that. And like, let's be honest, maybe there's something there. I don't know.
yeah.
Um, I think it's more about taking a strategic risk and a calculated risk. I think it's not. I'm not stupid,
So
and I
speaking of
know. Yeah,
Yeah, speaking of risks, I mean, probably one of the biggest risks you took in your life was after you left your father's business and went out on your own and you brought a signwriting company. That decision to leave a really successful business that you had built up over the
yeah,
course of a few years. I mean, I think you told me at one stage you were earning more money than Maggie Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister
I
of the
did,
UK at the time.
absolutely. I
Yeah,
remember. It's funny how you judge yourself, but um, I was doing really well. I was working very hard. I had 27 guys working for me, making signs for the oil industry. And I remember at the time that John Travolta hit the scenes with Saturday Night Fever,
right.
and he became famous. And I thought, well, what's he done? He's only throwing his arms about and doing a bit of singing or whatever.
Yeah.
I remember going, well, why is he any better than me? I'm better. Anyway. And then I remember Maggie Thatcher was earning 140,000 pounds a year or something like that.
Mm,
And I remember thinking, geez, I'm making more money than that. And
yeah.
she's got a heap of trouble to deal with. Anyway, the sign business was very good to me.
Mm,
It was a great educational piece in business, had to do everything um, in it, deal with the customers, deal with staff, do all of those things that were kind of, taking me from a self-employed environment into a proper business. And then it was so good that, and oil in the late 70s was a real world economy of its own. The oil industry was really prosperous. And I said to the guy from BP, or Chevron, where are you guys going next? Like, like I want to be there when you guys, hit the ground. And he said, we're going to Perth in West Australia. That's where we're going. And I went home. This is not a word of a lie. I went home that night and said to my wife, I said, Christina, we're going to go to Perth. I'm going to go to Perth. And she said, what, Perth in Scotland? Like there's a town called Perth in Scotland. And I said, no. I said, we're going to go to Australia. And she said, oh, for a holiday. I said, no, we're going to go to live there. And you got to remember, in those days, there was no Google, there was no
Yeah.
Wi-Fi, there was no internet, and I didn't have time to go to the library and read books. So we just took off and went.
Mm.
And I thought that I was going to change the way that Australia made signs. I thought that, and not just me, but the general thought in the UK at that time was that Australia was 20 years behind Britain. But in fact, I got a real shock. Australia was 5 years in front of the UK as far as signs go. And of course, I'd left everything behind, sold up everything. Christina was 7 months pregnant, so we couldn't go back. Um, and I was stuck in Australia, in West Australia, having made this rash decision to just uptail and go. Um, and be ready for the oil when it started, be ready for the Americans when they came. And I spent many depressing nights crying um, because I felt that I'd made a massive mistake because the oil never actually happened in Perth. It
Mm.
happened 2,500 k's north at Port Hedland and Dampier. So that was a I would say that was a depressing time for me, like 4 years of my life, where I was quite depressed. I didn't, when you phoned back to Scotland, you didn't want to tell people that things weren't working out quite right. Um, so I didn't want to go back there. And eventually we moved to New Zealand because I knew that I didn't want to stay in Perth. I had to move on to do something better with my life. Moved to New Zealand, which was a great move, a
Yeah.
great move. We met some fantastic people, rural people. They took us in like family, which I think is in my life it's been a major turning point where these families that we didn't know took us in as a
Mm.
young family into their lives and embraced us and helped us get
Yeah.
started on the journey. And I remember, I think we had $100,000 or something at that time
Right.
when we moved to New Zealand. And off we went and we got started. And there's many, many stories, up and down and roundabout about what happened and how it happened and,
Yeah.
lighting a hand on fire and
I'd love
stuff
to
like that.
I'd love to know though how hard was the decision to get back into the pet food industry, because I think you told me before that um, you'd seen how hard your dad worked in the pet food industry and didn't make a lot of money from it, and it was a hard graft. But yet you decided, tell me about that plane ride over New Zealand where you were looking down on the land and you came up with that lovely expression, there's money in shit.
Yes, I mean that was a light bulb moment or whatever they call it nowadays. Um, when I looked out on the plane flying over Auckland Airport to land and saw the green fields with the cows in it, and I just knew that I needed to get back to um, primary industry. The beef, dead cows, pet food, fat rendering, whatever. I really didn't want to go into pet food because, as you say, I'd watched my dad struggle away making pet food. My dad was a great guy. He probably wasn't the best businessman that you could meet, but a great person, a great creator. Um, but so anyway, I decided that, well, I knew that I should get back into um, meat, fat, rendering, pet food, something. But I didn't want to do pet food. So I went into sort of rendering, fat rendering, making dripping. We built up we built up the biggest dripping factory business in New Zealand. Um, yeah, I mean, somebody had to do it, and we did it. And from that, from the rendering of fat, you had leftovers, the crackling, that we sold to Total Pet Foods, who were the opposition to Butch. And that was it. And we did that for years until, and we built up a chip business, potato chip business. That was good. We sold that to Mr. Chips. That was, again, a good experience. At the time, a guy called Graham Edwards ran Mr. Chips. He said, "Look, I sold it for $250,000. He said, "Look, we're going to give you $100,000 up front, and we're going to pay you $50,000 every 6 months until we, for 3 times." So that was a great deal, because what it did was $100,000 paid off all my debts and everything else. So we were debt free, and we still had the little fat rendering business going. Um, and then I got $50,000 every 6 months, which actually was very handy, because as you develop things, you got a bit of money, and then another bit of money, another. So that really, Graham Edwards, who I again was an influential person in my journey, much more corporate than I ever was, and we had a good friendship in the end. And there's a few stories there that I could mention, but and then we, to be honest, mate, we were forced into making pet food, because the crackle that we used to box up and freeze and send to Auckland, we were getting 25 cents for, I think. Um, and there was a new manager came into the pet food, Total Pet Foods, and he phoned me up and introduced himself and said, "Look, that crackle that we're buying, we can only pay you 17 cents for it, not 25." And I said, "Mate, by the time I freeze it, freight it, package it, take it to Auckland, 17 cents doesn't even pay the diesel. It's a waste of my time. I may as well make my own pet food." And he said, "Oh, no, making pet food's not easy, blah, blah, blah." I said, "Mate, I grew up in pet food. I know all about it." He says, "Oh, well, 17 cents, that's all we're going to pay." So I was kind of forced to make our own pet food. And I remember that I made some, and I sent Christina out to sell it to Pack and Save. And the guy in Pack and Save said, "Yeah, yeah, we'll buy that because you're local. We'll buy that." And I actually hadn't made a proper brew. I just made some stuff up and packed it. That was it. And then I had to go and make pet food. And that's how that journey started, which was a great journey. And from then on, really, it was pet food 100%. As you said before, well, the New Zealand pet food thing grew to be very successful, sold that out, and came to Australia and started VIP.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Was it the work ethic that you learned, from a very young age, that was one of the key factors to your success? Because you touched already on it. Pet food is hard. It's a dirty job. It's not for everybody. But you had that instilled in you from a very young age. Was that one of the key factors? Would you suggest? And something that all entrepreneurs need. You need to be able to work hard.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, nobody's that lucky that you don't have to work hard, right?
Yeah.
So hard work is just part of it. But there's been many wise people tell you that working hard in a business that you love is not work. It's just, it's creating, it's being there, it's on the journey. And, hard work is fucking absolutely essential. Surrounding yourself with good people is absolutely essential.
Yeah.
And then delivering whatever you say you're going to deliver is absolutely essential. So there's many things that make up a successful business. And hard work is absolutely one of them. And yes, I would credit my dad and mum and dad and their work ethic that was passed on to not just me, but my two sisters and my brother too. I mean, they're all hardworking people.
in terms of that competitive spirit as well, and which you need to succeed, I suppose, in any kind of career. You had that from an early age as well, and you raced cars from a very young age, and you made a really strategic decision as well back then, which again, I suppose, reflects your ability to make tough decisions. Because I mean, I'm guessing the decision you
Yeah,
made back then
yeah,
wasn't easy.
no, that's a good point, mate. So back in Scotland,
Mm,
I very quickly became quite good at racing Formula Fords,
mm,
and my best friend was a mechanic with Vauxhall, and we would go to the racing, and quite often I would certainly be in the top three
yeah.
and get prize money for it. And so, as a young man, you think that you possibly have a career in
Mm,
this sport. And to be honest, sport back then wasn't really a career move. It was a hobby for everybody, even football players, cricketers, rugby. You had a job and then you played football or rugby or cricket or motorsport. There was very few professional
mm,
sort of guys. It was only just starting. But then, nonetheless, you would imagine that you could become a professional, or sports person. But I was certainly showing my colours in one race that we had in Ingliston in Scotland, where I raced against a guy called Eddie Cheever, who absolutely blitzed us, the whole bunch of us. And at that point, I knew that I shouldn't try and make a career out of motorsport.
mm.
And I basically walked away from motorsport from that point for about 20, 25 years. And when I was maybe 45, maybe, went back into motorsport in a small way, but found that I still had some skill in the sport. And I actually could afford to do it quite well by then,
Mm.
because of all the hard work I'd done. So today I say to a lot of people, look, unless you're breaking lap records and winning races all the time, don't have it as a career. Have it as a hobby, and you can go in and out of it as you can afford it, rather than mortgaging the house and everything else to try and be a winner
Yeah.
up front. And this forms part of my future thing with the Highlands and Hampton parks in New Zealand, where we're setting up an academy for young kids to come and see if they're any good. And we will be brutal with our uh, assessment of
Mm.
people. I mean, because I've seen it so many times where families and parents, like spend a lot of money, whether it's tennis or swimming or whatever. They spend a lot of time and money, really wasting their time and
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
So
Right.
the idea of the academy is to try and shortcut that journey for those people, and we'll try and give them a very good and quick assessment to see whether they should continue. A lot of these academy places around the world uh, have a look at the dad's bank balance to see how good the kid really is.
Mm.
I don't want to do that. I want to be brutal with the assessment.
How does running a racetrack compare to running a pet food business?
Well, running a pet food business is totally different.
Mm.
It's very much FMCG, as you said, fast moving consumer goods,
Yeah.
as opposed to fast moving race cars.
Yeah.
But running a pet food business is, and to be fair, the business became the 15th largest in the world, which, you're mixing with multinational companies at
Mm.
that level.
Mm.
So it was a big business, and it had all sorts of things going on. I was on top of all of the movements that were happening. I had help from the family and my key staff, but it was still a big business. It was very difficult to put it into practical terms.
Mm.
It was very difficult to get a worker to come and pack pet food on the night shift uh, on the Gold Coast, or one of the Sydney factories or whatever.
Mm.
Very difficult to get staff there. Whereas if you look at the racetrack, it's not difficult to get staff. It's seen as quite an exciting place to work. So,
Yeah.
and you get a better sort of quality of staff, to be fair,
Mm.
that want to come and work at a racetrack. So it's a totally different dynamic. You have to supply uh, a different product with the pet food thing compared to the racetrack. I mean, you're trying to make people happy and smiley. You've just got to produce mass amounts of good quality food in the other one. So, look, but every business is the same. It's got the same um, key elements that make it work. And as I said before, hard work, key staff, good staff, and deliver whatever you bloody promise. Just
Yeah.
deliver it.
Thinking back to that, 22-year-old at the airport in Scotland, leaving for Australia with the family, is there anything you'd say to that young fella now? What
I
advice
would
would you give
say,
him?
I would say, yeah, I would say two things. I would say, don't fucking do it. Don't do it. And I would say, get on with it.
Okay.
Do it.
Yeah.
And I was so lucky, I guess, that, this life in Scotland was very good. It was very educational. It gave me some great footings. It actually supplied me. I sold the business in Scotland for 75,000 quid, I
Yeah.
think, or 70,000 quid. So that gave me a hell of a good head start, right? And then I would say, what a great life it's been since we left Scotland. The first 4 years in Australia were very depressing, as I've said. But I feel that I had to do that. I feel that was quite important. And I'm telling you now, if that was modern day, I would have gone to the doctor. I would have got antidepressant pills. I would,
Right. Yeah.
it was a pretty, on reflection, it was a pretty serious time. I mean, a grown man crying
Yeah.
there's something wrong, and so you have to work your way through that. I ended up being a lawnmower man, cutting grass, and I quite enjoyed that. And I built that into the Lawn Ranger, which became the best one in Perth at that time. Small tick, but still. But I knew in my heart that I had to get out of there. It wasn't good for me. It wasn't a good place. I didn't fit in. So that's why when I flew to New Zealand to have a look, because I didn't want to go back to Scotland, that was not on the radar. But when I flew to New Zealand and had a look and saw the cows in the field, it was a eureka moment where I thought, yeah, that's really what I need to do. However, interestingly, maybe I should have come to the eastern states of Australia.
Yeah.
It might have been all right. Because we were in New Zealand for years, 9 years or so, or 8 years or so. And we got an opportunity to come to Sydney to do some business, pet food export from New Zealand to Sydney. And me and Christina spent a dirty weekend in Sydney, in King's Cross. And there's a life-changing moment right there. And it was a great weekend. And I said to Christina, I want to come here. This is my next move, is I want to come to Australia and make pet food. And she said, okay, one more time.
One more time.
You can make a move one more time.
Yeah.
And so we did.
Yeah.
And the story is well recorded from there.
Yeah, I mean, but ballsy decisions again, to shift from Perth to New Zealand and then to shift again from New Zealand to Australia with a young family.
Yeah, but like I meet many, many, many people who have not a similar story, but have made monumental moves with their family and business and careers and opportunities and stuff like that. And I tell them all, Robert, I say, guys, and you know the story. I mean, the most valuable thing that you'll leave your family is your story. And if I can just share with whoever's listening, like people that I know and I've seen have left their families millions of dollars, debt, houses, businesses, commitments. You leave all that to your family when you die and pass on. And invariably, it doesn't end up the way you thought it would. If you leave them millions of dollars, they argue about it, they fight about it, the families split up for decades, they don't talk to each other. All of these nasty things happen. And so I say to people, the most valuable thing that you'll leave them is your story. And it doesn't need to be a book. It just needs to be, um, their story, just in their
Sure.
own handwriting. But by far, and you know this, Robert, I've said to many people, for God's sake, get somebody else to come and sit down and speak to you, listen to your story, and write it down as a third party, so that it's a much better product when they're able to leave it. And I guarantee that perhaps not the first generation, your own
Mm.
children, they don't really care for it because they know all the stories anyway. But the generations that come after that, because a lot of young kids see their grandparents as just old fuddy-duddies, and sitting in the chair and slivering and eating custard or whatever they do. But they've had a life. So many old people have just got such an interesting life, and they never get asked about it.
Mm.
Nobody asks about their life. I do. I've got a weird thing there. I think it's really interesting listening to what people have done with their lives, and I I keep telling them to record it or write it down
Mm.
because it
To
is the best thing.
to finish, Tony, and thanks so much for your time. This podcast is called Origin Stories. Is there one superpower, one trait, or one skill above anything else that you think has helped you achieve what you've achieved?
Well, I think it's belief.
Mm.
Uh, it's belief in yourself. I think a lot of people, for whatever reason, believe in other things, God and Jesus and Muhammad and whatever else, and that confuses me. I don't quite get that. I don't, I don't believe that. I don't get that. But I think if you believe in yourself and you're honest and trustworthy and all those good things, you can embellish the truth sometimes if you're trying to get somewhere that you need to get to. Um, but you have to sell yourself. You have to, whatever you're doing, whatever you're making, whatever you're involved in, you have to be able to sell yourself and convince people that you've got something worth having or listening to or whatever. Um, and then, of course, the key part that follows that is that you have to deliver. So having belief that you're going to win lotto next week is fine, but probably impractical. And if you do believe that, well, make sure you fucking win it, because then you can carry on. So it's a belief in yourself and in practical small steps that become big steps and stuff like that. And look, I'm no different to anybody else in my position. I now have a problem with my wealth, if you like. How to be responsible in dealing with that. And I've started already. COVID has made me realize that I ain't going to be here forever. None of us are going to be here forever. And so I've started planning now what should happen with my accumulation when I'm not here. And so I've started now. I'm 63, and I reckon hopefully I have another 20 years. So I have 20 years to start this thing happening. And we have all sorts of things going on. I'm not a great believer in charities, but all sorts of things helping people that need a help, need a leg up or whatever. If they, if we can help one person out of 10 have a better life than they would have had, we're doing a good job. So we're on a mission to make an impact for the next 20 years.
Give other people
That's my.
good.
I mean, I've given up work, and I still work. I've still got many things going on, many staff still working for me, but a lot of my time now is taken up planning for the future when I'm not here.
Very good. Listen, Tony, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. It's been great, and we'll
Well done.
we'll catch you next time.